Good morning, afternoon, or night, depending on what time you are watching this. This is Melanin Mindset, a show that looks at mental health issues within the Black and ethnic minorities community. And today I have a special guest. Guest, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Mate-Kole. I currently live and work in Bristol within the criminal justice system and working with young people specifically.
All right. Okay. So first of all, I just want to know how have you been over the past year? How have you coped mentally with what we've all had to go through?
I think it's been like a real challenge, and like for various different reasons. So not even just within the context of COVID and the global pandemic, which has been like challenging in its own way, but I think also within like the wider context of seeing, I guess, Black Lives Matter being propelled on more like on a global platform, and the conversations and impact that that's had on the community has been really significant. For me, I guess the nature of the work that I do and working with young people who are involved in serious youth violence and drug-related offending, I was very much still at work throughout the various lockdowns. And so I guess I had some kind of protection of that normality day to day, being able to get out of the house, go to work, have a bit of routine still to what I was doing. And that was really, I think that helped me a lot in terms of looking after my own mental health, my own well-being, because I still kind of had that element of structure. Obviously, it was, you know, I had my son who was at home and trying to navigate home learning, which was initially a challenge, but actually, again, I was quite lucky in terms of the amount of work that he had and being slightly older, so a lot more self-directed, independent learning. But I recognize, like, for lots of my friends who, you know, were then working from home, some of those people with job insecurity, like the impact was huge. And then for myself and that family connection and just like the closeness and being, I guess, in close proximity to loved ones, taking, I guess you realize how much you take for granted in terms of, you know, being able to hug and the importance of like closeness with people, just being able to have like those ad hoc conversations. Me and my friends got quite creative, so we were very much having like online like socials every week, because that was really important that we still had some kind of like reflection space. And then I would say when Black Lives Matter was really propelled in the way that it was, that was an incredibly challenging time, because we had like social media blowing up in a way that it did, traumatic images and videos being played over and over in regards to George Floyd, but even in regards to others. Like, there was such a presence on social media, and I think like how that re-traumatizes you each and every time you see clips or you're hearing stories, and that's compounded by your own experiences, that really took its toll. But also it was really exposing. So in regards to, you know, people that you might think understood issues, or you might have had relationships with or friendships with, I think because the conversation was everywhere and people were kind of forced to, I guess, expose themselves in some way, their level of understanding or their bigotry, that I found incredibly challenging, and having to have these constant tiring conversations whilst also feeling quite broken and feeling like the people around me were feeling quite broken, and then going into work and other people might just be navigating the world as normal, whereas the traumatic experiences or the hurt or, you know, how it impacted on my own mental health and well-being wasn't necessarily even a consideration because it wasn't being lived. Particularly by you. So I think that's difficult. And being dual heritage, you know, having white family, again, that just brings up a lot of those conversations and realizing that not everyone gets it. I think having a realization moment of who you can have those conversations with, but also where a safe space is for me. And so like that's been really important, is where am I safe to have particular conversations, but also being really clear on when I don't want to, and not feeling like I'm always obligated. And our experiences don't always have to be I don't always have to divulge that to people. I'm not here to educate you or to keep telling you about what traumatic things have happened to me. There's sometimes I just need to breathe and be in a safe space with people I know who get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's definitely been really up and down. I, try to do the things that I enjoy, and that like wind down time. I find it much harder switching off, I think, during lockdown, because sometimes when there wasn't things to do, you just end up working, whereas you might have been more boundaried in that. So being mindful of what that means in terms of burnout and space, and then also just screen time. We've spent all this time telling each other and young people, like, don't spend so much time on your phone, and all of a sudden everything you do is on your phone or on a laptop. But it taught me a lot about what I need, I guess, to look after my well-being, who I need, and what kind of connections are the ones that are really important and help me stay really grounded and balanced. And that's been like a real significant learning for me. And then in the midst of that, like just being really mindful of how COVID disproportionately impacted on Black and minoritized communities, that experience of like loss, in its like broadest sense, like huge losses in terms of COVID, and that feeling so real. So it was very interesting, like people who talked about the pandemic, and it's felt like, okay, it's impacted on my work, but it's very much over there. And then whereas like for myself and family members and friends who were experiencing, the loss of loved ones and trying to navigate that in a lockdown and a pandemic. And that was incredibly challenging, not being able to console each other in a way that you would hope, not being able to do all those kind of things where you come together to help each other through such challenging situations. And just the level of isolation that I recognize that I was quite blessed in terms of work, etc. But for the impact on people's mental health of not having that interaction, the uncertainty of the world and what was going to happen and when it was going to be different. Like, these are just really significant things that are further compounded by the fact of, racism that's being experienced, the exposure or more conversation about institutional racism that's happening, not just in the US, but, right here, and how all of that compounds when you're at home, you're feeling isolated, and you don't have that support or those mechanisms. I think just can't be underestimated. The recovery period of COVID that we keep talking about, and like focus on vaccinations, etc. Like the recovery from COVID and the ripple effect is going to be felt, for decades and decades, whether that's about the impact on mental health in our communities, the impact on the economy, etc. And I think looking at it holistically of just what an impact it's had is really important, to think about just how much support and resources are going to be needed to kind of get us all through this.
Well, that's deep. I agree with what you're saying. We've all been affected in some way, shape, or form, haven't we? Some obviously more than others. What do you say to people that say things like, oh, well, stuff that happens to George Floyd won't happen in the UK, or, our police aren't like that, and our systems aren't as bad. Right? What do you say to that?
I would say that it's just like a real clear example of the fact that within this country, we don't just have institutional racism, we have institutional ignorance. And this idea that this is very much like a US problem. And there's lots of conversations that I keep hearing that's about whether, in America, it's just more overt, the level of racism. It's much more subtle in the UK. I disagree with that also. Like, I think that we see things in an extreme way in the US. Part of that is about the fact that police officers are always armed there. So that's going to be different anyway. But we can't underestimate the number of deaths in custody of Black and minoritized people. We can't underestimate the experiences of police brutality that's intergenerational within the UK. We can't underestimate like the impact that racism is having on people's mental health, but also those interactions that are being experienced day in and day out in terms of you know, there's lots of conversation at the moment in terms of health outcomes, you know, that Black women are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth, or just even are, you know, double more likely to be diagnosed with cancer at a later stage. All of these things are happening in terms of health outcomes, and the disproportionality around COVID and how it impacted on communities demonstrates to us how significant and deep-rooted the issues we have in the UK are. And they're not just deep-rooted on an interpersonal level of whether you've experienced racism directly from another individual, but they're so obvious in the way that we experience systems. So just thinking about, you know, our young people being more likely to be permanently excluded, Black men and Black people in terms of more likely to be over-medicated, detained under section. At every pinch point of a system, we can see how racism is played out. And so to keep deflecting the argument by saying, well, it's so extreme in America, we still have those experiences here, and it might not be as amplified, but they're happening. And if we have a voice, which we do, of communities who are saying, I'm experiencing racism, I'm experiencing prejudice in the terms of the way that I'm treated or the way that I experience the system, and I don't have fair access, that should be enough. I don't think the fact of like this negotiation of, well, who's doing it worse, or like that, I think it's upsetting that that's the narrative. Oh, well, America's worse. That's not the conversation we should be having. The conversation is, well, what are the experiences of people here? We've got information, we've got data, we've got lived experience. At what point do we take that to say something needs to change here and we're not okay, and our systems are built off of oppression? And in order for us to really, I guess, impact change in a way that we need to see for our communities, in a way that we like navigate through systems and experience the world and access to opportunities, like those systems need to be completely reformed.
I mean, you just mentioned something. You said if systems are built off oppression, you know, people generally fear change. And if a system has been built on something and it's been working or, you know, manifesting in that way, you know, I think people will naturally fear any form of change because they're wondering, how are we going to actually function without continuing the way that we've been doing it for so many years?
Yeah, and I think it's a really hard one because essentially, when people are demanding reform or demanding change, you're essentially asking those with power to relinquish some of those power.
Yeah.
And the question then to them is like, or the question they ask in response to that is, how is that in my interest? Yeah. You know, those in positions of power are going to think about, why is it in my interest to relinquish some of this power? But also, if a person, a white person, wants to be an ally in regards to race equality and really propelling change, it's hard work. It doesn't require you saying, I've read a few books, I get it now, I'm an ally. Like, to be an ally, you have to be named an ally, and you have to be on a continued journey of growth and development. And that might mean you lose friends by having those conversations. It might mean that you feel uncomfortable now having some of those conversations. And so that as a incentive doesn't look like an incentive, because it's hard work and it's difficult, which is why we always have to say, when people are saying, you know, well, it works the way it does, and why do we need to change, and change really difficult. It doesn't work the way it does, because we wouldn't have the level of inequality that we see. So firstly, it's not working, but also a benefit is around having diversity of thought and diversity within institutions, which is going to be the positive outcome. Essentially, we know the world is changing like really rapidly, and you need that diversity in order to make sure that you can serve the communities that you're supposed to be able to serve, that you can be as productive as you can be, that you have the best talent. You know, all of these things are based off of ensuring that you have diversity and that you're really working towards having equal access to opportunities. And those are the things I guess we need to be having those conversations more explicitly, because essentially a lot of people don't necessarily think it's in their interest to make a change to the way things are being done at the moment. But we know that that will have a positive impact, because we know that's what happens when we have rich talent, when we have diversity in leadership, when we have our young people being nurtured and their aspirations being nurtured, and us having hopes for what can be achieved and having equal access to resources to be sustainable, to be able to build and continue to invest in our own communities. So I guess it's the way that we continue to frame the conversation is going to be really important moving forward.
So explain to me about your job role and what is it that you do. You know, you don't have to mention the organization you work for, but can you just give an explanation of what exactly it is you do?
Sure. So I work with young people who are involved in serious youth violence and drug-related offending, in terms of usually supply of Class A drugs. And the idea of the work that we do is to build, I guess, a positive program of holistic support for those young people as an alternative to entering the criminal justice system. So we know that currently, sadly, the prison population, male population, aged between 15 and 21, that 54% of that prison population is made up of Black and minoritized young men. Now, that's such a stark figure, considering like our statistical equivalent to what we represent in the wider society, but also the fact that we've overtaken America in regards to the incarceration of our young Black men Black and minoritized men. And so the work that I do is very much around supporting young people with their aspirations, young people that have been failed by systems, young people that are often been excluded, who might have been told that they weren't going on to achieve anything, who would feel that the only way or opportunity for them is to, be involved in crime, or could have been exploited to be involved in crime. And so our role is to build, I guess, relationships with young people, to become a trusted adult, to be alongside them, and give them access to opportunities that they haven't. So that could be around things like financial literacy, independent skills, sports and fitness, mentoring support, thinking about their life coaching, how they use strengths of their history. So it's supposed to be a holistic program that's really equipping young people to be able to exit a life of crime and feel that they have opportunities to get into education, employment and training, and their aspirations can be nurtured, I guess, by the work that we do.
Okay, so what do you say to people that will say something like, these kids, they have choices and they just decide to make the wrong choices. Why should we give them any support?
I would say it's really interesting choices, because we can always talk about people having choices, but it's also like, what are the choices within that context? So there's different elements to it. Obviously, I work with some young people who have been exploited, and actually we're talking about adults who are grooming young children in regards to criminal activity. And in that, it's like we need to apply the same narratives and conversations that we have in regards to, sexual exploitation, domestic abuse. We recognize coercion and control in regards to domestic abuse. So we need to recognize coercion and control in regards to young people who are involved in crime as well, or being groomed to be involved in crime. There's young people that haven't, but I would say when we talk about choices, what's the context of that? So as a young person who might have been exposed to violence, that might have been exposed to abuse, which has been exposed to like significant trauma, who's navigated a schooling system that's not set up for them, who has a curriculum that's not inclusive, who penalizes you for not necessarily being able to learn in a way that school says you need to learn, which is very, very prescriptive and doesn't take into consideration your level of needs or what you might need additional support in. So you've been excluded. Your youth spaces have now been taken away because of cuts. So you don't have your youth centre. So you don't have a meaningful, you know, way of spending your time. You may be living in extreme poverty and overcrowded like home conditions. There's so many different factors that our young people are navigating, and particularly I work predominantly with Black and minoritized young men. So that compounded with, you know, what we see in the media, what the world is telling us about Black men and Black boys, what you can be and what you can't be, what you should look like and how you should act, like all of this pressure. And then the level of discrimination that you might experience. Well, now all of a sudden, there's potentially an option to make money, to not be discriminated against in terms of it as an employment opportunity, yeah, and to feel that you have some status in a world that is telling you that you don't, or you have some sense of belonging with this group of people who say they can keep you safe, who don't judge you for, you know, how you look and haven't told you that you're no good. Like that as a sense of belonging is really significant. And so it's not a single reason why a young person would be involved in this type of offending, but when we talk about choices, they're so compounded by the limits of where you are in society. And I think we're very good at pointing fingers, but we're not very good at recognizing that actually this generation has been raised by the last generation. And so as adults, what's our responsibility been in that? As communities, what's our responsibility been in that? Because the whole pointing fingers and saying, well, you just choose to do this. I don't work with a single young person who says my ambition in life is to be the biggest drug dealer and make the most money selling drugs and live that life. That's never the aim. The aim and the objective for the young people or their goals for life are the same as everyone else. I want to settle down. I want a family. I want a business. Or I want a job that I love. I don't like. There's not an aspiration to be living this life, which tells you it's a means to the end for a lot of young people that think it's the only option for them.
I mean, as you just mentioned, that the only option. I noticed that. I always looked at fast money was one of the key reasons why a lot of young people get into situations which lead them, you know, in either dead or in jail, where they want the money, but they want it quick, and they look at the scenarios and they look at the other generations and they look at their mothers and their fathers and their grandparents and they say, well, my mom's been working 9 to 5 for X amount of years, but she's still broke and struggling, you know. So why would I continue that cycle? And you know, so then they become easy prey for, you know, as you said, people that are grooming, like, let's say, yo, I can get you, you know, you can earn X amount of money a day as opposed to that same amount of money and have to wait a month.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, how is that the number one issue right now? Because I mean, that probably was when I was younger. I don't know how much.
It's definitely a really significant issue. I think it's really interesting is we've got the pressure of what we apply status to, and we know that a lot of that is, you know, in terms of like material, like what you've got to show for it, what you're wearing. That's been exasperated even further by social media. Yeah, it's gone from the level that you need to be at in terms of like feeling that you're keeping up with the Joneses is now like it, you know, incredibly expensive designer clothing. And then you have this idea of fast money, which you can access. No one's putting those barriers on. It's not like, what's your GCSEs? You know, those barriers that you have in access to work. And that's part of the lifestyle, is this like, you have to think, as teenagers, we're all more, like we all take more risks when we're young, yeah? Like all of us look back at things we did when we were teenagers and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that and didn't see that as a risky, you know, situation. The same way that young people are more likely to take part in other like safe risky situations. So for example, roller coasters, you know, like extreme rides, extreme sports, this kind of adrenaline rush that goes with like this fast-paced risk-taking lifestyle. So you've got the one element which is about fast money. I can get access to this. No one's putting barriers in my way for me to be able to do this. But also that kind of goes with my lifestyle, being able to kind of take risks, do things as soon as I want to do it, as soon as I want to do them. No one's holding me back and I have access immediately. And I think this idea of immediate and deferred gratification is something I have to continue to work with our young people. So saying to them, you know, explaining to them deferred gratification and the fact that we work and, you know, I've gone through a journey in terms of my career and where I get to, and I have to work and then I have to wait for my paycheck and this is how it goes for me. And then for them, everything has this level of immediacy, and this fast money has meant that life is fast too. So for example, even the way you engage with a young person, often they'll be like, Maya, come see me now. And it's like, I need to see you now. I need to see you right this moment. It's like, no, like chill, calm, like let's have a conversation. We need to think about why you think you need to see right this moment, why things need to be done right this second. And that leads to a lot of the conflict stuff as well, because we talk about quick, easy money, but it's not easy. You put in work, but fast money coming and going. But life's like that too. It's reactive, everything's reactive, or you get a call, so-and-so's got in something, I'm on it, this has happened, I need to respond straight away. That like slowing down process is kind of absent from the whole lifestyle. And I think that's a really challenging thing to transition a young person out of, particularly when you give the example of, well, I look at my parents and what have they got for their hard work?
Yeah.
And that's because the value is all on the material of that quick money. Firstly, the conversation I often have is that money came fast and how quickly did it leave your hands? Because that's a conversation that's not having enough. You know, it's quick money in, but it's also very quick money out. But where's the value in terms of things like self-fulfillment? And this comes with age, I think, and reflection as well. But that understanding of what are the things that you feel passionate about? What are the things that fulfill you, in terms of, everyone says, I want a business, and I'm really trying to home in on what is it? Oh, I don't want to work for someone. Okay, that's fine. But what's the passion? And who's ever talked to you about the things that you genuinely enjoy doing? And how do you place some value on that? And that's hard because there's pressures when you're young of what you have to dress like. And if you don't fit in, how that makes you a target. But starting to shift the narrative and the conversation for young people about what it is for them that's their passion, what it is for them that's worth working towards, what it is for them which is worth goal setting for and taking those steps gradually, is how, I guess, it's tapping in to what that drive can be. And it's interesting, I had a conversation with a young person who was just talking about like fast-paced life, and they miss how the fast money, but also like just the adrenaline of what goes with some of the offending. Am I going to get caught? Am I been on a chase? And us talking about, I get it, the adrenaline, we need to keep that, but how do we do that in a way that's safe for you, while still working on these things that are going to be a long-term goal around your work? So for example, the adrenaline rush of a police chase. How about we look at dirt biking for you? Yeah, where you can do that and get that adrenaline and get that out your system. But then also, you know, that on Tuesday, when you've got that appointment that you want, because it's in regards to your future career, and that's really important to you, you're still able to concentrate in that space because you've got a positive outlet of where you're getting that adrenaline that kept you really trapped. And so I think we have to be more creative and flexible with the way that we think about the lifestyle and how people are going to get some of the thrills that they get from the lifestyle in a more safe and like conducive environment.
Wow. Are there any, I mean, I haven't been to school, I think I finished school 17 years ago, maybe 18, I think. But it's been a while since I've been to school. Are there any formats for young people to get educated on financial literacy, such as, you know, understanding credit, understanding cards, understanding how mortgages work, and things like that? Are there, you know, things in place? Because I mean, we never got that in school, and or is it just solely placed on the parents to educate their children on that? Was there anything out there?
So we do it as part of our program, but obviously our program is really specific, and we partnered with some local organizations. So there's some organizations that are doing work like that, like Talking Money, who are starting to do things around financial literacy. I think we have a huge gap for it, like significant gap within the community around that being widespread and accessible. Because you say, you know, is it just down to parents to teach it? That's presuming all teachers have, all parents have been taught it, which we know isn't the case either often. Like, I think there's something about how we make things accessible across the community, because we, as adults, I know that I have taken things for granted or haven't understood the system. Like, who's having conversations with us when we come into the workplace about the importance of pensions? You know, like, even those things in our adult life, we might not necessarily have the knowledge or expertise or who've been taught it. So where that's a real gap where I think we need to mobilize, like, collectively as a community, to not just be educating young people, but to be educating each other, because we need to reinvest in our communities. We need to understand the pathway to having our own assets. We need to understand the pathway for, I guess, how we can give ourselves financial freedom to some degree.
No, I mean, it's interesting you say, like, you know, assuming that every parent knows it, which isn't the case. I mean, even if some of them did, it's about how up to date are you as well, because they may know what they went through in the 70s or maybe the 80s, but things have changed since then. The early 90s, things have changed since then a lot. House prices have changed, you know, fluctuation, all of that. So sometimes it's a case of, like, they can't teach, or even what they think they know is no longer the case, you know?
100%. I think my mum even says, like, when she bought a house, it was 100% mortgage. Yeah, she was a single person on average wage. So the same, you know, teacher, nurse in Bristol, one person, 100% mortgage, able to buy a house. Well, we all know, anyone who lives in Bristol, that's not an option for the one person by themselves, on an average wage in this city. And even just the way that lending works, you know, 100% mortgage, and just, you know, so you're right. I think things quickly change. And also it's about, this is when I think there's also schools need to really reflect on where there can be creativity in the curriculum, because I get that there's a curriculum in terms of GCSEs and stuff, and nationally we know that we need to decolonize the curriculum, we need to make it more inclusive, it needs to be more diverse and global, but we also need to be really creative about what lifelong learning is incorporated as part of education and schooling and college. Because, like, I know in my school, something like PSHE as a subject was just kind of like the mess around subject. It wasn't the, you know, significant learning around healthy relationships, around understanding independent living skills. You know, like, there's so many significant opportunities with young people as they're developing to really harness those skills, and to be teaching them things that they're going to need as an adult for the rest of their life.
No, I totally agree. Even things like food tech and, you know, stuff like that, you know, the importance of that, like, just knowing how to prepare food for yourself, you know.
And that being diverse as well. That's where it's interesting, because we look, like, I think back to my old, like, food tech classes and what we were cooking, you know, and even that wasn't framed in a way that made it a lifelong skill. You know, like, I went to food tech, I probably made a shortbread,
bacon,
you know, one cookie, great. But at no point was someone teaching me around actually how do you understand like the basis of like, you know, foundation ingredients that you make a range of different dishes from, how can you plan meals and like nutritious in this way. So even when we've had opportunities, they've never been looked at as like a lifelong skill. It's always been looked at as within a curriculum, and this is how it's going to be done. So, and where's the diversity in the food tech as well? Like, I don't know how things have been moved on now, but it's like, what are the foods? Do we recognize like the student population who we serve as a school? And when we're looking at recipes and we're trying to teach like the foundations of different dishes, are we thinking about who these young people are? Have we got, you know, are we looking at Caribbean recipes? Are we looking at Ghanaian recipes? Are we looking at Somali recipes? Like, how are we being inclusive in even the way that we're looking at food, diet, and nutrition?
Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. I do think that diversity, we have to be more reflective of the land that we're in. You know, but I'm just going to go back to what you were saying about the prison, because you said, was it 54%?
Yeah.
54%. And I believe the Black and ethnic minority community make up, is it 14% of the UK?
Yeah, of the UK population.
Right. So, and what was the, because you said we passed America, so what was the American incarceration rate?
I can't remember the American statistic. I think they're in the 40s, but it fluctuates. So the significant thing is every point of the criminal justice system and where there's inequality. So we have, you know, huge disproportion in terms of like the stop and search of Black and minoritized people. We then also have significant disparity in charging decisions for our community. And then we have, you know, just like the assessment process and how like pre-sentencing reports are written, for example. We have at the point of court, how people are viewed in court, and then you have disparity in sentencing. Yeah, so like at every single, and then that's not even to go like once you're in custody, like what your experience is there, then what level of support you have in terms of rehabilitation, and then also like in terms of who has access to parole. Like at every element of the criminal justice system, there's a huge disparity.
So with, you know, okay, so I'm gonna play advocate for a sec. So I know there's gonna be a lot of people that are gonna say, look, these people put themselves in these positions, they get themselves into trouble, they have an excuse for everything, and they want the easy way out. You know, the educational system, for example, why should it change, you know, for 14%? Shouldn't it cater to the majority? I mean, what do you say about that?
I think it's really ignorant, because we never, again, it's just like this deflection from like the system and our sense of responsibility as a society. You know, this idea that there's this idea that it's just, I want to be bad, and that's a core value or something at the core of our young people, when in fact what we have is young people who have been traumatized and failed, who, for example, if we look at the school to prison pipeline, you know, young people who are excluded are more likely to be criminal exploited, they're more likely to be in the criminal justice system. If we look at things like that, then rather than saying, well, this as a criminal, like this is how they work, we should be tracing that all the way back and saying, actually, at a schooling system, we're failing these young people and we need to work differently. We need to work in a trauma-informed way so that we can provide these young people with the support, because what we don't have enough conversation of is every young person that is lost to custody and is lost to prison and lost to the criminal justice system. Like, we should be seeing that as a loss to us as a society and a community. That young person could have been an entrepreneur. That young person could have been a role model in their community. That young person could have done so much. And rather than looking at actually with the right support, this is what they could have become, and we failed because this is where they're at, we instead start having conversations about blame. Well, not our problem, it's them, they do this. Whereas we've lost out. So it's in our interest to change the way we're doing things to prevent young people having traumatic experiences, young people being failed by the system, because essentially they could be a valuable member of our society. And that level of compassion often seems to be missing from the conversation. And I find that when we talk about, so we're talking about prison, we can't not talk about the other elements of institution inequality that experience in terms of like poor housing, poverty, and how those are contributing factors to crime also. And so the conversation's always going to be complex, and crime and serious youth violence happens in all white areas too. So that shows you about disparity also within the criminal justice system.
As you just said,
sorry, carry on.
Yeah, sorry. As you just said that, what's brought to my mind is Scotland. Now, I believe possibly about 10 or 12 years ago, I believe it was Glasgow, but don't quote me on that, I might be completely wrong.
It was.
And it was Scotland that had the highest knife crime rate. I believe it was in Europe or even in, you know, and the government done something, and I don't know, up to today, I don't know what the government has actually done, but the knife crime has reduced significantly. And they've done something in Scotland. A lot of people are saying, so whatever Scotland done, they need to try that in London or try that, you know.
So what they did in Scotland was they adopted a public health approach, which was the fact that they treated, I guess, serious youth violence as you would any other public health concern, in terms of looking at holistic support, preventative support. It's a bit, there's like specifics to what you use and interventions that are available through public health approaches to addressing serious youth violence or violence as a whole. But generally it's about looking at like prevention, holistic support, engaging with families, looking at education, employment and training opportunities, working like multi-agency, so having the community involved, wide provision, activities, like it's quite a web of support that's needed. And essentially that's supposed to be the basis of the models of violence reduction units, which are popping up all over the country at the moment. And we have our very own in Bristol, and different ones across Avon and Somerset. And essentially that's what those hubs were doing, was to work in a multi-agency way with various different partners to look at young people, they have like, I guess, different tiers of young people, those that they're targeting, like early intervention, preventative, those who are like entrenched, and different packages to support, and ensuring that education's included in that conversation, health's included in that conversation, that you're looking at families, so you're looking at the interactions with communities. And so people have seen what's happened in Glasgow and have said, yeah, like that's what we need to do. But essentially it's a long-term solution. And we talked about in regards to young people and fast money, but governments are the same. They say, I'm giving you X amount of money to do this piece of work. And then, you know, within a year, if they haven't seen the changes they want to see, are they going to reinvest in it? And so I think it's interesting because we keep talking about like what Glasgow's done, but it's about time, and it's about continuity, and it's about ongoing investment. And I think we get very much trapped in like setting things up for a year or only being funded for a year, and then if you haven't had the right outcomes in that time, not being able to continue with that service, that support or project. Whereas we need to be planning much more longer term, because essentially to support young people who have maybe experienced up to 18 years of challenges or discrimination or being failed or being excluded, that's going to take some considerable time you know, to support them in their journey to where they need to get to, and in terms of, I guess, recovering from offending.
Right. Wow. It seems to me like there's barriers. There's stuff is happening, but there's also barriers as well. We're very much in a social media society right now, and you know, a lot of companies will use social media to advertise themselves, and there are movements that are happening, and social media have driven a lot of those movements as well. So there's been positive elements to a lot of the social media stuff that's out there. But how much, well, there's also negative as well with the bullying and things like that. So, I mean, what are the key things that are, you know, what's happening on social media now with the young people from the Black and ethnic minorities background that you're seeing within your work?
Sure. So I think specifically within our work, we see like a lot of the beef, if you like, playing out online. So people, you know, making videos, putting them out, calling each other out, like fights being filmed, like stabbings being filmed, calling people out, being in their area, filming yourself in their area, sending that to Snap. Like the escalation of violence online has been very exasperated, I guess. And I think like within lockdown, things quietened down in terms of serious youth violence, but actually it was paused. And as soon as think like lockdown started to ease, the emergence of that was really significant and really clear for everyone to see. I think the pressure is really significant. I talked about like status in regards to like material goods earlier, and I think that's been exasperated more by this expectation of a lifestyle people are expected to live. So there's one thing, you need quick money to look a certain way, but now you have people basically saying online, like, this is what your whole lifestyle should look like. It should be, you know, and we've always had reference points to this. So by no means do I think social media is, you know, the most significant factor at the moment to serious youth violence. It's not. It's something that's exasperating an existing issue. But you have this whole lifestyle now. So it's not just about the expensive clothing. There's an expectation that you travel. There's an expectation that, you know, you put bottles in this way and that way. And I think of myself when I was younger, like those reference points or this aspiration to that lifestyle was from music videos, but that still felt like it was quite a distance. Whereas now it's like you're seeing people from your area, you know, who appear to be living this lifestyle. You're seeing people that, you know, have all these likes and seem to have all this designer clothing. And it's almost as if your sense of self, or your sense of self, or your self-worth, I guess, has come by how many likes you get, how many followers you have, how, you know, how you're dressed. And it's almost as if I don't reach a benchmark in terms of likes or this, now that tells me I'm shit, I'm not where I need to be, and I need to go harder. And I think how we view ourselves has become quite distorted in regards to social media, and also the fact that other people now can see what happens to me on social media. So, you know, in terms of some of the violence that we see, they've now seen me get broke up, or they forced me to say something, you know, on a video, which I now know is out there for the world to see and isn't going anywhere. And then how does that impact on me and my sense of self? And when we grow up, as we grow up, our main audience of how we make sense of ourselves is our peers. And it stops being our families and our parents, and their influence is less relevant to us. We, as teenagers, the thing we care about most is how our peers see us. And so, you know, if this is playing out all on social media, that's going to have a huge impact on how I start to think of myself, and whether I'm good enough, whether I need to do more, whether I need to go harder, whether I need to be richer, etc., etc. So I just think we need to just bear in mind. And also as practitioners, do we keep up with the relevance of social media, or do we minimize it? Because, you know, I think sometimes we get in a habit, like, how are you going to let somebody, you know, how are you going to let somebody get to you through, you know, through an app? Like, how are you going to care how many likes you've got? Oh, but if it matters to the young people, it matters to the young people. So it's more about what conversations are we having them with them to build up their sense of self in other ways. It's not about us diminishing how they feel about social media or how social media is making them feel.
I feel that. Can you explain to me, if you don't mind, like your upbringing? I mean, what was your upbringing like?
I would say overall, like, I had really blessed upbringing, in a sense. Like, I lived in a single parent family with my mum, my white mum. But I was raised in Eastham, so I lived in a diverse community. I went to a diverse school. I had really good, like, cultural references, I guess, in regards to having, like, a strong sense of self-identity. And also my mum was quite proactive around, like, race equality work and equality work as a whole. So it meant that growing up, I think I was lucky that I always had really honest conversations about race. My mum had very honest conversations about, like, white fragility before. This was when I was younger. So talking about, like, privilege, like, that's something that have always been open conversations, which has meant I've always been able to have open conversations about that with my mum, and also be able to freely, like, express and navigate my sense of self and my identity as being a dual heritage, like, girl and woman. I would say I had, like, my big primary school, secondary school was very, like, bubble-like. I think my realization of what was happening in secondary school was definitely, like, we started to see, you know, the Black boys being excluded or being kind of shipped off to college when we were in secondary school. And perhaps, yeah, I just think you start to see how the system is working and how it's failing, like, at quite a young age. When I was 15, me and my best friend Alicia, like, we started doing some, like, peer mentoring type stuff. And that kind of ignited, I guess, an excitement in youth work. Also, like, a significant thing was, we talked about it, well, I talk about it a lot with my friends, but also about, like, the sexualization of young Black girls and how that plays out as well, like, in the community. And we've talked a lot about, you know, at a young age in school, like, you know, there's all these older guys around, and the fact that there's no concern from teachers, etc., that this is, like, the dynamic, and not seeing that as a potential grooming, etc. Like, me and, like, the girls I went to school with, like, have all had experiences of that, which really shaped our life in a way that we understood the world. Like, myself, I fell pregnant when I was 17. And so I was, like, doing my first year of A-levels at the time, dropped out. I had my son, and then I went back to college when he was 6 months old, finished my A-levels. And that was because, I guess, I have, like, in terms of my upbringing and my mum's family, like, they're very middle class, like, very aspirational. Everyone's gone to university. And so that was always in my mind as an option. And that aspiration was kind of always nurtured. So I've been very privileged in that way, and recognizing that privilege, that actually, even when I felt pregnant, I was never not gonna go to uni, and I was never not gonna, like, carry on with my path. And so I just kind of just got back into it. You know, I went straight back to college. It was hard. I had a child. I was doing odd jobs. I was volunteering. I was, like, always busy. And then, yeah, went to uni and studied, etc. And so, but it's interesting because I've seen, like, the experience of my friends who have gone on to have, like, great careers, etc. And school wasn't aspirational for us at all. So I guess I kind of had my mind of what I wanted to do based on like my family influence, but school wasn't necessarily saying that in that way. And so, yeah, a couple of my friends like talk about how they were told, like directed in different like career paths where they could have gone on and been so much more aspirational, have now shown like just how capable they are, but weren't nurtured in education at all. And so I think I'm really aware of how we, like what we portray to young people about what they can be and their ambitions, and this is why we have conversations about the importance of role models in our community, and not just people who have, maybe been in trouble, maybe offended and then rehabilitated. That's a fantastic story and it's an important one to tell, but also telling the stories of those people who have been aspirational, are aspirational, those people who have been in the same environment and went a completely different way and never got into that trouble. And how do we learn from your motivations in that, Yeah, sorry, I ramble a lot. You will have got that as we've been going on. I go off on tangents.
That's cool. No, that's cool. Like, I notice when you speak, you use terms like we and us.
Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed is that, and I've done it myself as well, and I think everybody's probably done it, but a lot of times you have a generation that will say, you young people, your generation, and we start to say the negative things about that generation.
Yeah,
but what we don't ever take into consideration is that the fact that the generation you're referring to are raised by you.
Yeah.
So the generation you're referring to is raised by the generation that you're in. Like, so, and then up above that as well. And, so my parents' generation raised me. So when they're saying, you guys this, that, and the third, they're really judging, they really should be, I guess, judging their peers and themselves on the jobs that they've done. But obviously it's not just parents as well. There are other outside influences such as the media. So how much do you think the media plays a part in what you're saying? I mean, you kind of touched on it already, but do you think from what you've experienced in the people that you've worked with, have their influences to lead them the wrong way been predominantly by issues that's going on at home, or is it just what they've taken from,
I think it's a range of factors, and I think sometimes what we try and do is like simplify. And I would say there is a very small number of young people who are involved in offending because they like the idea of the lifestyle or what they've seen on the media and how it's portrayed, and that they want to be part of it. Like, that's a really tiny number. I would say the majority of young people, it's not about the media why they're doing it. I wouldn't say, oh, it's always about what's going on at home either. It's the interaction of a range of different things. So it can be the interaction of your experience of education, of living in poverty, of potentially trauma and challenges within the home environment. Sometimes not. It can be just about the influence of your peers and where you've placed. It could be an abusive relationship that you've ended up in. There's so many different contributing factors. I think the media has a lot to answer for in this country, like on so many levels, about the portrayal of Black men, the portrayal of Black women, we just see outright racist, Islamophobic, everything media. So there's a lot to answer for. But I also think, as much as we talk about drill music and the impact that it has, for example, on our young people, we need to stop taking that as the example of, well, this is why everything's happening, because that's really detrimental as well. We have some young people who rap about things that they're not living and isn't their experience because they want to fit in with that type of music, and then things escalate because people have been calling each other out. We have other young people that are talking about violence that they've done, and if they didn't have that stream of music, would still be doing the violence that they're talking about. And so with that, we need to be focused on how they've got to that stage and what interventions could have been done at what stage to prevent this level of violence or being entrenched in this lifestyle happening. So for me, the media is very significant, but I also think it's really important for us to have honest conversations about the causes and what interventions could have been done earlier to holistically support these young people and prevent entry into this lifestyle. Because essentially the government, for example, who is focused a lot on drill music and banning drill music and all these orders of what can be said in music, etc., they're also the same people who are very happy for us not to have youth centres, you know, and safe spaces for young people. So I think we need to just be really honest when we're talking about the media and its influence, but also about actually, what about the mental health of our young people? What are we doing in schools in regards to that? How are we holding, you know, how are we holding systems to account in regards to how young people are being treated? Where are we challenging the criminal justice system in a way young people are disproportionately represented at every single stage? So, you know, you can take all this money and invest it in serious youth violence at this end, at the crisis end, but essentially we could also take X amount of money and invest it in fantastic education, therapeutic interventions, having safe youth spaces, which essentially is likely to have prevented a lot of the serious violence that we're seeing at this crisis point.
For real. I'm gonna come to my final question, right? As a community, right? One of the reasons I even started this podcast is because as a community, mental health is not something that we really delve into as much as we should, in terms of it's still quite a taboo subject. It's still quite like, if somebody was to say, oh, I'm seeking therapy or I go to see counseling, it may get a bit of abuse for that. Or I mean, my background growing up in like church, for example, it's like, if you're going through anything, you just pray and then it'll be okay. But there's no aspect of like seeking help and things like that. So for the young people that are coming up now, how many of them are actively actually seeking forms of help for whatever situation they're going through? Or is it a case of you have to intervene because they don't feel, for example, they don't feel like they could speak to a white person about the subject because they feel that person may not understand where they're coming from, and they don't want to speak to somebody from their community because it's like, that person may know my parent, they may know family or something like that. How much of them are actually going out there and know, how much of them know that there are places for them to get help?
I would say in the world I work in, like very few are seeking actively. But I would also say, like, if we just reflect back on when we were teenagers, how many of us felt like we needed help with things and would actively seek support. Like, it tends to not be like the default mode. Yeah. However, I would say for me, it's really important to normalize conversations about mental health. So with my young people, it's a conversation I have from the first time I do my assessment with them, is looking at actually thinking about their mental health, putting that language out there, because there's lots of conversation. Oh, you know, it's too stigmatizing to talk about mental health with young Black boys. Actually, I find the opposite. I find that I need to give them some like references to be able to describe what they're going through. Yeah. So I talk about mental health, and if I don't talk about it initially, I would talk about their well-being and mood, and then talk about mental health, so that we're normalizing that conversation. But also, I've given you a dialogue to talk about what you're going through, and that I can talk about it this openly. It's not even a thing that's a difficult conversation to bring up, and it might be difficult to disclose at this moment, but let's create an environment where this is something that we do regularly. Yeah. And so then you start to think that it's something that, you know, we talk about, and also I'm modeling that for them. I would say you're completely spot on. It's really interesting you said it, because me and Alicia were talking about this on our podcast yesterday, was in regards to this idea that your options can sometimes be a white therapist or a Black therapist who is living in the community that you were raised and knows everyone, and how safe do you feel to have those conversations. So we were talking about, you know, the importance of, that's why we need to really push for diversity within psychotherapy, well-being services, counseling services, because it's really important. And it's also to say that just because you have a Black therapist, like if we don't have diversity and we have 2 Black therapists, you're not necessarily going to be a match for every Black person. You're not necessarily going to understand the nuances of what is it like for a young person who's experiences serious violence. That's a very different dynamic in that. So we need to recognize that as even within communities, there's diversity. And so that diversity needs to exist in the way services are offered. We also need to be more creative in the way that we're offering therapy. Like, it's not going to work for everyone to sit in a room face to face and talk about your issues. And so what are we doing at thinking outside of the box with therapy? So with our young people, there's ways to have conversations about mental health informally as a starting point. And then it's about what can that feed into? So, there's services in Bristol that are doing things really creatively about therapy, like NAOS, who do music therapy, but they do it in the genre that young people would be listening to. So writing your lyrics like that with a psychotherapist is a therapeutic process, and with a producer who makes the type of music you want to be making, that seems like such a fantastic idea. The same as box therapy with Empire Fighting Chance and NAOS, where they've got therapists trained up as boxing coaches. So, it's all of these things, which is about, when do we start taking the lead from the young people themselves? We're dictating this is how you do therapy. There's many ways to do therapy. And we also recognize in this country, a lot of the ways therapy is delivered is Eurocentric. It's based on European models. And actually, there's lots that we can learn from African-centered therapies and healing. And how do we start to be more creative about what's available for young people? Is there ways that we can meet young people where they are rather than them always coming to us? How do we create safe environments in different places so young people feel safe to be able to have conversations, because it's not always appropriate? And how do we level out the power dynamic? Because for a young person who has felt oppressed, who might be being exploited, all of these things might be going on. And then what? I'm going to say, you must come to me in this space and we must talk in this way. We need to think more outside of the box in regards to it. Our young people aren't, I can only speak from my experience. My experience isn't our young people are reluctant to have a conversation about mental health. It's that people and services are often afraid to have those conversations, and also don't know how to have those conversations, just steer away under the guise of it will be too stigmatizing, and it's too stigmatizing to have that conversation. These young people know what they're feeling, the level of trauma some of them had experienced, the way their mood is up and down, they know it more than anyone. And it's up to us to be able to equip them to be able to navigate it or know how to access support. But we need services, that reflect them and are able to work in them in a real collaborative way that is non-threatening.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of times, sometimes it just takes for them to just have someone to talk to.
Definitely.
And during that conversation, they realize something about themselves that they didn't even know. So triggers, for example, or something traumatic that happened to them when they were young, and they start talking, and eventually they get to that point and they realize, oh, that is why I am this way, or that is why this triggers me. But they may not have ever even considered that before that conversation. So when we talk about stigmatizing them, it's sometimes they do need to just have that, just speak, have someone to talk to, have someone to listen to, and then get to that point where you can address the root of what they're going through and why they are acting the way they are.
Definitely. And I think we underestimate that as well. How often do we really ask young people, not just oh yeah, how are you, you're right, but actually have a conversation about, well, how are you sleeping? That's always a real good indicator for me. How are they sleeping? That's a conversation to have. Talking to them in depth about when they say I wasn't feeling great that day, having a conversation, what was that like? What is it like when you're having one of those low days? And what is it that stops you having a low day today? What are the things that have supported you in today? You've managed to get to see me today. That's amazing. So what was different about today that we can learn from? What are those things? So I think being able to have dynamic conversations with young people is is really important. And sometimes young people don't know, and then being able to say, I don't know. Sometimes they don't know what emotion they're feeling, or the only thing they think it is anger. But then I've had so many encounters when it's been portrayed as anger, but actually the conversation then has gone on to be, well, actually what happened in that moment? Let's replay what happened in that moment. And it might have looked like anger because, you know, of their presentation, but that's the only way they know how to display it. Like what they were feeling was hurt, was upset, you know, was sadness, but they don't necessarily have like the emotional literacy to be able to describe that. And so you just act in a way that you know how to survive and act. And so I just think we need to equip young people also with a better understanding and exploring with them around navigating emotions, tools to manage these emotions and what these emotions mean. Sometimes even letting you feel emotions, because a lot of the young people I work with smoke weed so they don't have to feel them.
Yeah. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking like, I've got nieces and nephews, and you know, friends have kids and stuff like that. And a lot of times, as you mentioned, like not being able to express themselves with the right words, you see it with little children even when they just make noises, and the parent will say, "Use your words, calm down, use your words," because you know the words, but because they're in an emotional state, and they just want, like, for example, they're pointing at something, you know, like biscuits or something like that. And you say, no, just stop. What would you like? Oh, I would like a biscuit. Well, that's what you needed to say, right? But at that, in that time, they're like, making voices, and it's like, I don't know what you're saying. And sometimes you just got to give them that time and teach them that patience. But like you said about, sometimes they don't know the words. They don't know how to express. So they just act. They just act out for a reaction and hope that someone gets it, you know?
Definitely.
All right. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That's okay. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your education. And I wish you all the best in the future for what you're doing. I think it's very credible what you are doing. And, you know, we do need more organizations and more people like yourself to help the young people, because, you know, it's a lot easier said than done. And it's a lot easier to judge than actually put in the work as well. I know, for example, I did not grow up in school with social media. That was not available when I was in school. So I can't even imagine what it's like being in school. I'm happy that I didn't have social media in school personally.
Oh my gosh, me too.
I would have hated it. When I looked and see what's going on now, I'm thinking, especially the school I went to, I'm like, boy, we were bad enough towards each other's face. So like, I don't even know.
Imagine people having evidence of it. Like, it's not the one. My son's 15, and so I'm navigating it now as a parent of like the social media, and it is just, I'm glad we don't have it. We didn't have it.
I mean, I'm on social media now, but I mean, back in school, like every day was banter. Like, you know, the school I went to, every day was insults flying and teasing. Like, and nobody got off the hook. Do you know what I mean? And my school was very multicultural. You know, so it was just, so yeah, I could just imagine, wow, like what a lot of these young people are going through. It must be hard. It must be incredibly hard to deal with it. And you know, we use terms like, you know, you just got to be more thick-skinned, you just got to deal with it, and you know, chin up and, you know, man up, and you know, all these sort of things. But it's a lot deeper than that. How it affects people is a lot deeper, and sometimes we don't know. Like we said, we don't know what's going on at home as well. You know, and the parents, sometimes the children aren't speaking to the parents about the situations. Like, how often, like you said, as a teenager, how often will you go back to your parents and be like, oh, this happened at school, you know, when you're like 14, 15?
And it's branched into our private as well. You know, like the reality is home was home. And now you have like this device, which means if you're being bullied or people are saying things, it's in your private space now. And it's easy to say like, turn off that phone or whatever, but actually it's already in that space.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm 33, and I look back and are you familiar with the prefrontal cortex?
Yeah.
So, that apparently doesn't develop in your brain until you're 25. So essentially, you're pretty much what, as they say, you're almost like an adolescent until that age, until you start to think differently and the logic and things. And that's why we can look back and be like, what was that?
And that risk taking and all it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But a lot of times that's why we get confused, because we look at the young people and say, what made you think? But you were also like that. But because you're past that stage now, you sometimes don't can reflect at that time. So
Definitely.
but yeah, I mean, we could be here all day talking about talking about this. I mean, it is a very deep subject, and one of the things that really frustrates me is the lack of the cuts to youth services, youth groups. That really hurt me. I used to volunteer with youth groups and stuff, so
yeah,
you see the effect of that. So it is true what you
definitely.
said. The same people that say they want to ban this, they're the same people that made the cuts. So it is. There's a lot going on.
It is.
There is a lot going on. But once again, thank you for your commitment. How long have you been doing it, by the way? How long have you been in your field of work?
Oh, well, it depends what you mean, really. Like, obviously, the current job that I'm doing, well, the organization I work for at the moment, I've been with for 6 years. The type of work that I'm doing specifically around criminal justice, I've been doing for about 3 years, 2 years. And then working with young people, I've been doing since I was 15 myself. So I've always volunteered or done mentoring, worked with young mums, worked specifically with young Black boys at risk of exclusion, youth offending teams. So I've always been in that. And then the same with my work that I do around race equality, I've been involved in for probably the last 5 years. So yeah.
Wow. And is there anything up and coming that you want to want to let us know that we can look into? Is there any websites or anything like that?
In terms of community stuff, I think there's a long list of different community organizations that have been doing things. It's hard to know where's a central hub, to be fair, in terms of accessing that information. No, so I don't know necessarily where you would specifically go for that. So in terms of more generically, in Bristol, obviously Bristol City Council and even Somerset, Constabulary, are involved in the violence reduction unit. And there's safer options within Bristol, which is specifically looking at tackling serious youth violence. So further information about those approaches can be found online on the Bristol City Council site. There's some really great organizations that are doing work in East Central. There's tons to name, but people like Growing Futures, Bristol Horn Youth, ACE, Docklands, Amela, LPW, Bernardo's. There's a whole range of different services that are doing great stuff at the moment. And so, yeah, I just encourage people to, I guess, just get a bit of an understanding of what's happening in their local area, what services might be available, because I think, yeah, it's always good to know. And also in terms of if you need to access support as well, or you're concerned for your child or young person, the serious violence reduction units, they're connected with family support. So there's lots of different services, I guess, working in this area.
Fantastic. Okay, well, once again, thank you for being on the show. Okay,
lovely. So thank you very much.
This has been Melanin Mindset. So for all those who've been watching, good morning, good afternoon, or good night. Peace.